Sometimes the most fascinating questions begin with two simple words: what if? What if one of the most powerful Force users in galactic history had been born not in the ancient days of the Old Republic, but during the tumultuous era of the Skywalker Saga? What if Darth Revan, the legendary warrior who walked both the light and dark sides of the Force with equal mastery, had emerged when the galaxy needed him most, or perhaps when it could least afford another threat to balance itself against? The story of Revan in the Old Republic era is one of redemption and duality, a tale of a Jedi who fell to darkness only to return to the light, forever changed by his journey through both realms of the Force. He was a military genius, a master strategist who defeated the Mandalorians and later commanded the Star Forge, an ancient superweapon capable of producing endless fleets. His power was immeasurable, his wisdom profound, his capacity for both destruction and salvation unmatched. But that Revan existed nearly 4,000 years before the rise of Anakin Skywalker. Imagine instead a different timeline, a galaxy where Revan's birth coincided not with the Mandalorian Wars, but with the decline of the Galactic Republic. Picture a Force-sensitive child born with the same exceptional potential, the same capacity for both light and darkness, the same strategic brilliance that made the original Revan a legend.
How would such a being navigate the political machinations of Palpatine?
How would he respond to the Clone Wars, the rise of the Empire, or the emergence of the First Order? This is not a simple swap of characters or a reimagining of established events. Rather, it is an exploration of how one man's presence could fundamentally alter the course of galactic history. Revan was never just powerful, he was transformative. His very existence challenged the rigid doctrines of both Jedi and Sith, proving that the Force was not merely a battleground between absolutes, but a spectrum of possibilities. In the Skywalker era, dominated by the prophecy of the Chosen One and the manipulation of Darth Sidious, Revan's presence would introduce an entirely new variable into an already volatile equation. The galaxy of the Skywalker Saga was defined by its struggles between tyranny and freedom, between the dark side's seduction and the light side's hope. Into this crucible we place a soul who has walked both paths, who understands the temptations of power and the weight of redemption better than almost anyone. We place Revan, the birth of a legend.
The year is 32 years before the Battle of Yavin, on a world far from the galactic core.
While Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi were embroiled in the Trade Federation's blockade of Naboo, while young Anakin Skywalker was still racing pods on Tatooine,
another child was born on the outer rim world of Duralia,
a relatively peaceful agricultural planet known for its amber grain fields and modest spaceports. The child's parents were unremarkable by galactic standards. His father worked as a freight coordinator at the local spaceport, managing the flow of goods between Duralia and neighboring systems. His mother taught younglings at the settlement's small school, instilling in her students a love of history and the ancient tales of the Old Republic. They named their son Kale, a traditional name in their region that meant warrior of wisdom. From the moment of his birth, there was something different about Kale. Objects in the medical facility moved without explanation. Instruments hummed with energy when he cried. The attending medical droid recorded unusual readings in the infant's blood work, readings it couldn't fully explain with its programming. The parents dismissed these oddities as equipment malfunctions, perhaps lingering effects from a recent solar flare that had disrupted some systems across the planet. But 2 weeks after Kale's birth, a Jedi came to Duralia. Jedi Knight Soraya Ven was on a routine mission to investigate reports of pirate activity in the Outer Rim when she felt a disturbance in the Force, a ripple of potential that drew her to this agricultural world like a beacon. She had been a Jedi for nearly 20 years, had discovered dozens of Force-sensitive children in her service to the Order, but she had never felt anything quite like this. The presence was powerful, almost overwhelming in its intensity, yet it emanated from someone so young that Soraya initially doubted her own senses. Following the call through the Force, she arrived at the modest dwelling where Kael's family lived. His mother answered the door, confusion evident on her face as the robed Jedi introduced herself. Soraya could sense the woman's apprehension, the natural protectiveness any parent would feel when a stranger arrived asking about their newborn child. She chose her words carefully, explaining the nature of the Force and the Jedi Order with the patience born of decades of similar conversations.
When Soraya finally laid eyes on the infant, she understood why the Force had called to her so urgently.
The child's midi-chlorian count was extraordinary, rivaling even the most powerful Jedi masters she had known. But it was more than just raw potential. There was a complexity to the child's Force presence that she couldn't quite articulate. It was as if the Force itself recognized something significant in this newborn, as if destiny had marked him for a purpose that transcended normal understanding. Kael's parents faced an impossible choice. Jedi Knight Ven explained that their son had the potential to become one of the most powerful Force users the galaxy had ever known, that the Jedi Temple on Coruscant would provide him with training, guidance, and a purpose greater than anything he could achieve on Duralia. But accepting meant giving up their child, allowing the Jedi Order to raise him according to their ancient traditions and codes. It meant surrendering the future they had imagined for their son in exchange for a destiny they could barely comprehend. After 3 days of contemplation, of sleepless nights and tearful discussions, they made their decision. They would allow Kael to join the Jedi Order. His mother held him one last time, whispering promises into his unhearing ears that she would never forget him, that she believed he was meant for greatness. His father clasped Jedi Knight Ven's hand and asked only one thing, that she ensure their son learned not just power, but wisdom. Saria Ven carried the infant Kael aboard her ship, setting course for Coruscant. During the journey, she meditated on what she had felt in the child's Force presence. There was light there, certainly, a warmth and potential for great good, but there was also shadow, not corruption exactly, but a depth that suggested this child would one day face choices that would test him in ways few Jedi had ever been tested. She reported her concerns to the Jedi Council upon her arrival, but Grand Master Yoda simply smiled his ancient, knowing smile and said, "Strong in the Force this one is. Guide him well, we must. His path, uncertain it remains, but needed he may be in the trials to come." The Council accepted Kael into the Jedi Temple, assigning him to the youngling clans where he would begin his training alongside dozens of other Force-sensitive children. From his earliest days, the instructors noted his exceptional abilities. He could levitate objects before most younglings could properly meditate. His awareness of the Force was instinctive, requiring little instruction to refine. He absorbed lessons with a hunger that both impressed and slightly concerned his teachers. Training in the temple. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was a wonder of architecture and history, its spires reaching toward the sky as if trying to bridge the gap between the mortal realm and the cosmic Force itself. Within its halls, thousands of Jedi trained, meditated, and prepared themselves for service to the Republic. It was here that Kael, who would eventually be known by many names, spent his formative years learning the ways of the Force. In the youngling clans, Kael distinguished himself almost immediately. While other children struggled with basic telekinesis, he could manipulate multiple objects simultaneously, guiding them through complex patterns with an ease that suggested innate understanding rather than learned skill. His instructors in lightsaber combat noted his natural affinity for Form V, the aggressive style that emphasized strength and power. He grasped the fundamental concept of turning an opponent's strength against them with a strategic mind that seemed beyond his years. But it was in the lessons about the Force itself where Kale truly excelled. When Jedi Master Luminara Unduli spoke to the younglings about the living Force and the cosmic Force, about how these two aspects intertwined to create the energy field that bound the galaxy together, Kale asked questions that made even the seasoned master pause. He wanted to know why the Jedi only studied the light side when the Force clearly had multiple facets. He wondered aloud whether denying the existence of darkness was the same as overcoming it. These questions troubled some of his instructors. The Jedi Code was clear. Emotion led to passion, passion to suffering. The dark side offered quick power, but corrupted all who touched it. For a 10-year-old to question these fundamental principles suggested either extraordinary wisdom or dangerous curiosity. Master Yoda, when consulted about Kale's philosophical inquiries, simply noted that a mind that questioned was a mind that sought truth, and truth, however uncomfortable, was preferable to blind obedience. When Kale turned 12, he was chosen as a Padawan by Jedi Knight Darius Kane, a skilled diplomat and warrior who had served with distinction during several peacekeeping missions. Kane recognized in Kale a reflection of his own younger self. Someone who combined exceptional Force abilities with a strategic mind that saw patterns where others saw only chaos. Under Kane's tutelage, Kale learned not just combat techniques and Force powers, but also the art of negotiation, the importance of understanding multiple perspectives, and the value of seeing beyond immediate problems to long-term consequences. Their first mission together took them to the Outer Rim world of Ryloth, where they mediated a dispute between rival clans over water rights. Kale, observing the situation, proposed a solution that none of the adult negotiators had considered. Instead of dividing the existing water sources, they could work together to tap into a deeper aquifer that geological surveys suggested existed beneath the disputed territory. The clans, intrigued by the young Padawan's suggestion, agreed to a joint excavation project. Within months, they had discovered water reserves sufficient for both groups, transforming a zero-sum conflict into a collaborative opportunity. Kane was impressed not just by the solution, but by how Kale had arrived at it. The young Padawan had studied the planet's geology, interviewed elders from both clans about ancient legends of underground rivers, and used the Force to sense the flow of water deep beneath the surface. It was a perfect blend of research, cultural understanding, and Force sensitivity, the kind of comprehensive approach that separated great Jedi from merely competent ones. As the years passed, Kale's reputation within the Order grew. He participated in missions across the galaxy, always distinguishing himself through a combination of power, wisdom, and tactical acumen. When he was 16, he helped Master Kane expose a corruption scandal within the Galactic Senate, tracing a web of bribery and influence peddling back to several prominent senators who were embezzling funds meant for humanitarian aid. When he was 18, he defended a remote agricultural world from a band of raiders, not through overwhelming force, but by predicting their attack patterns and setting up defenses that made their assault logistically impossible. But beneath his successes, something stirred within Kale that he couldn't quite name. He felt constrained by the Jedi Code, not because he wanted to indulge in attachments or emotions necessarily, but because he sensed that the Code's rigid boundaries prevented Jedi from reaching their full potential. He began to study ancient texts in the temple archives, reading about Jedi who had walked different paths, who had questioned the established doctrines and sometimes paid terrible prices for their curiosity. It was during one of these research sessions that Kale discovered a fragmented holocron, one that contained partial records from the Old Republic era. The holocron spoke of ancient Jedi who had fallen to darkness, of wars fought thousands of years before, of a legendary figure who had led armies and commanded superweapons before finding redemption. The records were incomplete, the name of this figure lost to time, but something about the story resonated deeply with Kale. Here was proof that the Force was not simply light and dark, but something more complex, something that could encompass both extremes and everything between. Master Kane noticed his Padawan's growing philosophical questions. During their meditations together, he gently reminded Kale that the Jedi Code existed not to limit them, but to protect them. That countless Force users throughout history had believed they could master both light and dark, only to be consumed by their own hubris. Kale listened respectfully, but privately. He wondered if those ancient Jedi had failed not because they attempted the impossible, but because they lacked the wisdom to maintain balance.
When Kale was 20 years old, the Clone Wars erupted across the galaxy.
The Jedi Order, which had served as peacekeepers for 1,000 generations, suddenly found itself thrust into the role of military commanders. Kale, who had just been elevated to the rank of Jedi Knight after successfully completing his trials, was assigned to lead clone troopers in battle against a separatist droid army. It was a role for which his strategic mind and combat skills had uniquely prepared him, but it was also a role that would test his understanding of the Force and the Jedi Code in ways he had never imagined. The Clone Wars transformed the galaxy in ways that few could have predicted. What began as a dispute over taxation and representation evolved into a massive conflict that consumed entire star systems, displaced billions of beings, and fundamentally altered the nature of the Jedi Order itself. For Kale, now a Jedi Knight commanding troops on distant battlefields, the war became a crucible that would forge him into something the galaxy had not seen in millennia. His first major engagement was the Battle of Christophsis, where he led a battalion of clone troopers against separatist forces that had occupied the Crystal World. The tactical situation was dire. The Republic forces were outnumbered 3-1, and the Separatists had established defensive positions that made a frontal assault suicidal. Traditional military doctrine suggested either calling for reinforcements or attempting a prolonged siege, but Kale saw a third option: using the Force to sense the energy patterns in the planet's massive crystals. He identified a harmonic frequency that could disrupt the Separatist droids' coordination systems. Working with his clone commander, he had his troops set up sonic generators at strategic points around the battlefield. When the devices activated simultaneously, they created a resonance wave that traveled through the crystalline structures, effectively scrambling the droid army's communication network. In the resulting chaos, Kale's forces were able to strike decisively, liberating Christophsis with minimal Republic casualties. The victory earned him commendations from the Jedi Council and the respect of his clone troopers, who began to see him not just as a Jedi commander, but as a general who valued their lives and fought with both honor and cunning. Clone Commander Apex, who led Kale's battalion, remarked that serving under the Jedi Knight felt different from serving under other Jedi. Kale didn't just issue orders. He explained his reasoning, involved his troops in planning sessions, and treated them as individuals rather than expendable assets. But the Clone Wars were not just a series of tactical problems to be solved. They were a grinding, brutal reality that exposed Kale to suffering on a scale he had never imagined. He walked battlefields littered with the bodies of clone troopers and civilians caught in the crossfire. He witnessed planets reduced to ruins by orbital bombardments. He felt through the Force the terror of populations fleeing their homes, The desperation of soldiers fighting for causes they barely understood, the manipulation and deception that lurked beneath the war's official narratives. During a campaign on the planet Jabim, Kale encountered something that would haunt him for years to come. The Separatists had deployed a new type of weapon, a chemical agent that didn't kill its victims but drove them into a state of uncontrollable rage. Entire cities descended into chaos as friend turned against friend, as parents attacked their own children in mad frenzy. The Jedi Council ordered the planet quarantined, declaring it too dangerous to save. Kale refused to accept this judgment. Against explicit orders, he took a small team of volunteers back to Jabim's surface, seeking a way to neutralize the chemical agent. For 3 days and nights, he worked with local scientists and medical personnel, using the Force to understand the agent's composition and effects. Finally, he discovered that a combination of specific frequencies and certain native plant compounds could break down the chemical at a molecular level. The solution worked. Jabim was saved, its population gradually recovering from the madness that had gripped them. But when Kale returned to the Jedi Temple, he faced a reprimand from the Council for disobeying orders. Master Windu particularly emphasized the danger of allowing individual Jedi to make such decisions independently, noting that the Order's strength lay in unity and adherence to command structures. Kale accepted the reprimand with outward humility, but inwardly, he questioned the wisdom of a system that would condemn millions to death or madness for the sake of military efficiency. He began to see parallels between the Jedi Council's increasing militarization and the very authoritarianism they claimed to oppose. The Council, once composed of wise guardians of peace, now spent more time planning military campaigns than mediating disputes. The Temple, once a place of contemplation and learning, had become a war room where strategies for destruction were debated with the same intensity that was once reserved for philosophical discussions. It was during a particularly brutal campaign on Umbra that Kale's doubts crystallized into something more dangerous, a desire for change. The Umbaran campaign was a nightmare of friendly fire incidents, betrayal, and needless sacrifice. Kale witnessed clone troopers forced to kill their own brothers who had been misled by a Jedi general's deception. He saw the toll that constant warfare took on beings never given a choice about their own creation or purpose. In the aftermath of Umbara, as he meditated in his quarters aboard a Republic cruiser, Kale reached out through the Force seeking understanding. What he found instead was a presence, ancient and powerful, that seemed to recognize something within him. It was not a voice exactly, but an impression, a sense that he was connected to something larger than the Jedi Order, larger than the Republic, even larger than the war itself. The presence suggested that true power came not from adhering to rigid codes, but from understanding all aspects of the Force, from walking both light and darkness without losing oneself to either extreme. Kale should have reported this experience to the Council. It was clearly some manifestation of the dark side, an attempt to seduce him away from the Jedi path. But he didn't report it. Instead, he began to explore this new awareness privately, pushing the boundaries of what the Jedi taught was possible. He discovered that by channeling his anger at the war's senseless brutality, he could enhance his combat abilities beyond normal limits. By drawing on his fear for his troops' safety, he could achieve feats of Force strength that surprised even him. The more he explored these forbidden techniques, the more effective he became as a military commander. His successes in battle mounted. He won engagement after engagement, often against impossible odds, saving countless Republic lives and pushing the Separatists back from world after world. The Jedi Council praised his accomplishments while remaining ignorant of the methods he was using to achieve them. His clone troopers would have followed him anywhere, seeing in their Jedi general a leader who seemed to genuinely care about their survival and who possessed power that bordered on legendary. But with each victory, Kale felt himself changing. The line between necessary force and excessive violence began to blur. During a battle on Felucia, he found himself force-choking a separatist commander who refused to surrender, not because it was tactically necessary, but because his anger at the commander's defiance had overridden his better judgment. He released the commander before causing permanent harm, but the incident shook him. He had crossed a threshold, had used the dark side not in momentary stress but as a deliberate choice. That night, as his troops celebrated their victory, Kale stood alone on the hull of his flagship, looking out at the stars and wondering what he was becoming. Was he still a Jedi? Or had he become something else? Something the Order would never accept? More troubling still, did it matter? The galaxy was burning, the Republic was crumbling, and the Jedi seemed more concerned with maintaining their own purity than with achieving victory or saving lives. It was then that he made a decision that would alter his destiny forever.
He would continue to use whatever powers he needed to end the Clone Wars and save as many lives as possible.
If that meant drawing on both light and dark, so be it. If it meant defying the Jedi Council, he would accept that consequence. The war had taught him that purity of method mattered less than the outcomes achieved. He would become what the galaxy needed, even if it meant transforming into something the Jedi Order could never accept. Unknown to Kale, his growing power and independence had not gone completely unnoticed.
There was one who watched his progress with great interest, one who saw in this powerful young Jedi the potential for something far greater and far more terrible than a mere military commander.
Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord hidden behind the mask of Chancellor Palpatine, had sensed the darkness growing in Kale's heart, and he began to make plans. Chancellor Palpatine had spent decades engineering the perfect trap for the Jedi Order, but individual Jedi still required individual attention. Each one had their own weaknesses, their own vulnerabilities that could be exploited. When he turned his focus to Kale, he discovered a mind already questioning, already pushing against the boundaries that the Jedi Code imposed. This was not another Anakin Skywalker, driven by fear and attachment. This was something more interesting. A Jedi who sought power not for personal gain, but from a genuine philosophical conviction that the Jedi's limitations prevented them from achieving true good in the galaxy. Palpatine began subtly. During military briefings where Kale was present, the Chancellor would make observations about the war's conduct that echoed the young Jedi's own private concerns. He would lament the Jedi Council's reluctance to pursue decisive victories, noting how their restraint prolonged the conflict and cost more lives in the long run. He would praise Kale's tactical innovations, his willingness to think beyond traditional Jedi doctrine to achieve results. Each comment was carefully calibrated to reinforce Kale's growing belief that the Jedi's rigid adherence to their code was a liability rather than a strength. The trap was set during a private meeting that Palpatine requested with Kale, ostensibly to discuss strategy for an upcoming campaign against separatist forces in the Mid-Rim. The Chancellor's office was a masterpiece of political theater, its furnishings and artwork chosen to project both power and wisdom. Palpatine greeted Kale warmly, treating him not as a subordinate but as an equal, a fellow strategist concerned with the Republic's survival. "You've accomplished remarkable things during this war, Kale," Palpatine began, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "Your victories have saved countless lives, both military and civilian. The Republic owes you a debt it can never fully repay." Kale, still committed to Jedi humility despite his growing doubts, demurred. "I serve the Republic and the Force, Chancellor." The credit belongs to the brave troops who carry out the missions. Ah, but there you demonstrate another of your virtues, modesty, Palpatine smiled. Though I wonder, do the Jedi Council appreciate your contributions as they should, or do they, perhaps, view your methods with some concern? The question struck closer to truth than Kael wanted to admit. His recent reprimand over Jabim still stung, and he knew that some council members questioned his increasingly aggressive tactics. But he maintained his composure. The council has expressed some concerns about my choices. That's natural. The Jedi value restraint and patience. Restraint and patience, Palpatine repeated thoughtfully. Noble virtues in peacetime, certainly, but we're not in peacetime, are we, Kael? We're in the midst of the greatest conflict the galaxy has seen in 1,000 years. Millions die while the Jedi debate philosophy. Worlds burn while they meditate on the proper application of the Force. Tell me, do you truly believe their approach is correct? Kael hesitated. This was dangerous territory, criticizing the Jedi Order to a politician, even one as apparently sympathetic as Palpatine. But something in the Chancellor's question, the way it articulated doubts Kael had harbored but never voiced so plainly, compelled honesty. I believe the Jedi are trying to serve the light, Kael said carefully, but I've come to question whether their understanding of the Force is complete. They teach that we must avoid anger, fear, and passion. Yet I've found that these emotions, when properly channeled, can fuel tremendous good. A soldier who fights from fear for his comrades' lives fights more effectively than one who approaches battle with detached serenity. Fascinating. Palpatine leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. You've touched on something the Jedi have long failed to understand. The Force is not simply light and dark, good and evil. It is power, raw and neutral, that takes its character from how it's wielded. The Jedi fear this truth because it undermines their entire philosophy. For the next 2 hours, they discussed the nature of the Force with an openness that Kael had never experienced with his Jedi mentors. Palpatine spoke of ancient Force traditions that predated the Jedi, of techniques and philosophies that had been suppressed or forgotten. He shared historical examples of Jedi who had questioned the code only to be cast out or worse. And throughout it all, he wove a narrative that appealed to Kael's growing conviction that the galaxy needed something more than what the current Jedi Order could provide. The meeting ended with Palpatine placing a hand on Kael's shoulder, a gesture that would have seemed presumptuous from anyone else but somehow felt appropriate from the Chancellor. I share these thoughts with you, Kael, because I see in you someone who truly wants to save the Republic. Someone willing to do what must be done, regardless of outdated dogma. The galaxy needs more Jedi like you. Don't let the Council's fear hold you back from your full potential.
Over the following months, these private meetings continued.
Each time, Palpatine revealed a little more, pushed a little further. He introduced Kael to texts from the Jedi archives that the Council had deemed too dangerous for general study, texts that discussed Force techniques the Jedi had banned. He explained that these techniques weren't inherently evil, they were simply powerful, and power always frightened those who lacked the wisdom to wield it properly. The turning point came when Palpatine finally revealed his true identity. It was a calculated risk, but the Chancellor had prepared the ground carefully. During one of their meetings, as they discussed the nature of the Sith, Palpatine stood and unleashed a controlled burst of Force lightning, watching Kael's reaction carefully.
You're a Sith Lord,
Kael said, his hand moving instinctively toward his lightsaber but not quite drawing it. The revelation should have filled him with horror, should have sent him running to the Jedi Council, but instead he felt a strange sense of clarity, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. I am Darth Sidious, Palpatine confirmed, making no move to attack. "And before you fulfill your Jedi duty and attempt to apprehend me, consider this. Everything we've discussed about the Jedi's limitations, about the need for a stronger approach to the Force, about the importance of achieving real results rather than maintaining ideological purity. All of it remains true regardless of my identity. The Sith are not simply evil beings who crave destruction. We are pragmatists who understand that true peace can only be achieved through order, and order requires strength. You've manipulated this entire war," Kale said, the pieces continuing to fall into place. "The Separatists, the clone army, all of it was your design."
Not manipulation, Sidious corrected. Orchestration.
The Republic was dying, Kale, corrupted by bureaucracy, weakened by its own democratic ideals, incapable of defending itself against threats from within and without. The Clone Wars are necessary to purge this weakness, to forge something stronger from the Republic's ashes, and the Jedi, for all their noble intentions, are part of that weakness. They cling to their code while the galaxy burns. You've seen this yourself. Kale stood at a crossroads more profound than any he had faced before. Everything in his Jedi training screamed that he should attack Sidious immediately, that he should warn the Council, that this was the ultimate test of his commitment to the light side. But another part of him, the part that had been growing throughout the Clone Wars, whispered different counsel. What if Sidious was right about the Jedi's failures? What if true peace really did require the kind of strength and decisive action that the Jedi Code forbade? "What do you want from me?" Kale finally asked, still not drawing his lightsaber. "I want you to help me save the galaxy," Sidious replied simply. "The Jedi Order is planning a coup against me. They sense the war approaching its end and fear losing their influence over the Republic. They will move soon, and when they do, I will need allies who understand that preserving the Jedi's outdated philosophy is less important than ensuring galactic stability. Join me, and together we can create an order that truly brings peace." "You're asking me to betray the Jedi Order," Kale said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm asking you to save it," Sidious corrected. "Or rather, to save what it should have been. The Jedi have forgotten their original purpose. They've become politicians masquerading as mystics. But you, Kale, you understand what real service to the Force looks like. You've already been using techniques they would call dark side powers, and you've used them to achieve good. You've already proven that their binary thinking is flawed. Why continue to serve an order that would condemn you for being effective?" The point of no return, the decision did not come immediately. For 3 days, Kale wrestled with the choice before him. He meditated in his quarters, reaching out through the Force, seeking guidance, but found only contradictions. When he touched the light side, he felt the serenity and peace the Jedi promised, but also a nagging sense that this peace was purchased through willful ignorance of reality's harsher truths. When he touched the dark side, he felt power and certainty, but also an undercurrent of corruption that threatened to overwhelm his self-control. What finally decided him was not philosophy, but pragmatism. Kale used his considerable intelligence network and Force abilities to investigate Sidious's claims about a Jedi coup. To his shock and growing anger, he discovered that Master Windu and a team of Jedi Masters were indeed planning to arrest the Chancellor. Their justification was sound from a legal perspective. They had uncovered evidence of Palpatine's Sith identity, but the political timing was suspicious. The Separatists were on the verge of collapse, peace negotiations were beginning, and the Jedi chose this moment to move against the Republic's lawfully elected leader. More troubling still, Kale found evidence that the Jedi Council had known about Palpatine's identity for some time. but had delayed acting, waiting for the political situation to reach a point where they could justify their coup to the Senate and the public. They had allowed the war to continue, had allowed countless beings to die while they positioned themselves for maximum political advantage. The realization filled KL with a fury that no amount of Jedi meditation could dispel. When the Jedi strike team moved to arrest Chancellor Palpatine, KL was there, but not on their side. He arrived at the Chancellor's office to find Master Windu and his team already engaged in combat with Sidious. The Sith Lord fought with the lightning speed and devastating power that characterized Sith combat forms, but he was outnumbered and being pressed back. "Stand aside, KL," Master Windu commanded when he noticed the younger Jedi's arrival. "The Sith Lord must be arrested and brought to justice." "On whose authority?" Kale demanded. "The Senate didn't order this." "The Jedi Council has no legal right to arrest the Republic's Chancellor. He's too dangerous to be left alive," Windu insisted.
"You don't understand what's at stake here." "I understand perfectly," Kale replied, and ignited his lightsaber.
But instead of moving to help the Jedi Masters, he positioned himself between them and Sidious. "You're engineering a coup while claiming to preserve democracy. You've known about the Chancellor's identity long enough to expose him through legal channels, but you chose to wait until you could seize power directly. The Jedi Order has become exactly what it claims to oppose." What followed was brief and brutal. Kale, empowered by his righteous anger and his unconventional mastery of both light and dark side techniques, fought with a ferocity that shocked the Jedi Masters. He disabled Master Fisto within moments, then engaged Master Windu directly, while Sidious recovered and struck down the other two Masters. The battle raged across the Chancellor's office, furniture exploding and walls scorching as force powers and lightsaber strikes tore through the space. Finally, Master Windu found himself disarmed and kneeling before both Sidious and Kale. The Jedi Master looked at his former colleague with a mixture of horror and pity. "You've fallen, Kale. You've allowed your anger to consume you. This path leads only to suffering." "This path leads to order," Kale corrected. "To a galaxy where beings are judged by their actions, not their philosophical allegiances. Where power is used to achieve results, rather than being hoarded by those too afraid to act." Sidious moved to deliver the killing blow, but Kale stayed his hand. "No, he should stand trial. Let the Senate judge whether the Jedi's coup was justified." Sidious smiled, recognizing that his new apprentice still retained enough of his Jedi principles to be valuable as a public face for the new order he was creating. "Very well. Master Windu will face justice. And you, my young friend, will help me build something better than what the Republic has become." That night, Darth Sidious executed Order 66. Across the galaxy, clone troopers turned on their Jedi commanders, cutting down the Guardians of Peace with brutal efficiency. The Jedi Temple was stormed and its inhabitants slaughtered. The 1,000-year reign of the Jedi Order ended in fire and blood. Kael should have felt horror at this genocide. Instead, he felt a cold certainty that this was necessary, that the Jedi's time had passed, that the galaxy needed to evolve beyond their limited understanding of the Force. He told himself that their deaths were regrettable but inevitable, casualties in a transition that would ultimately save far more lives than it cost. Darth Sidious recognized that his new apprentice was different from previous Sith apprentices. Kael had not fallen to the dark side through fear or hatred, but through a philosophical conviction that the Jedi's approach to the Force was fundamentally flawed. He would require a different kind of training, one that honored his intellectual journey even as it pushed him deeper into darkness.
"You will need a new name," Sidious told him as they stood in the Chancellor's office, watching the Jedi Temple burn on the horizon.
"The Sith tradition demands it. Henceforth, you shall be known as Darth Revan." The name resonated through Kael with a force that felt like destiny. It was as if the Force itself had been waiting for him to claim this identity, as if all his life had been preparation for this moment. Darth Revan, the name spoke of power and wisdom, of someone who had transcended the limitations of both Jedi and Sith to forge their own path. "What happens now?" Revan asked his new master. "Now," Sidious replied, "we transform the Republic into an empire, and you will help me build the army that will enforce the new order." The rise of the Empire, the transition from Republic to Empire, happened with shocking speed. Sidious, now openly declaring himself Emperor Palpatine, presented the Jedi as traitors who had attempted to assassinate him and seize power. Master Windu's trial became a spectacle of propaganda with carefully edited recordings of the Jedi's attack presented as evidence of their treachery. The few Jedi who survived Order 66 were declared enemies of the state to be hunted down and eliminated. Darth Revan became the public face of the Empire's military might. Unlike Darth Vader, who Palpatine created from Anakin Skywalker's broken body, Revan was whole, powerful, and charismatic. He led the Empire's fleets with the same tactical brilliance he had demonstrated during the Clone Wars, but now freed from the Jedi Council's restraints. His successes were spectacular. Separatist holdouts collapsed before his assault. Pirate confederations that had plagued the Outer Rim for generations were crushed in coordinated campaigns. Crime syndicates found their operations systematically dismantled. To the common citizens of the galaxy, Darth Revan appeared to be exactly what the Emperor claimed, a powerful guardian bringing order to chaos. HoloNet broadcasts showed him distributing aid to war-ravaged worlds, personally leading efforts to rebuild infrastructure destroyed during the Clone Wars. The Empire's propaganda machine carefully edited out the darker aspects of his methods, the planets forced into compliance through overwhelming shows of force, the populations terrorized into submission. But Revan was not content merely to serve as the Emperor's enforcer. He began building his own power base, recruiting Force sensitives who had never been discovered by the Jedi, and training them in techniques that drew from both light and dark traditions. He called this group the Imperium Guard, positioning them as an elite force loyal to the Empire's ideals rather than to the Emperor personally. Palpatine tolerated this development because it served his purposes, creating a counterbalance to Vader's inquisitorius while ensuring that no single faction became powerful enough to threaten him. The Imperium Guard became known throughout the Empire's enforcers, who combined the Jedi's discipline with power that seemed limitless. They hunted down the surviving Jedi with ruthless efficiency, but they also mediated disputes between planets, protected civilians from criminal elements, and genuinely worked to establish the order that the Empire promised. Revan had convinced himself that these good deeds justified the Empire's darker actions, that the peace they brought to previously chaotic regions outweighed the cost in freedom and autonomy. For 5 years, this system functioned. The Empire grew stronger, its control extending to the farthest reaches of known space. Revan continued to believe that he was serving a greater good, that the temporary authoritarianism would eventually give way to a more enlightened order once the galaxy had been stabilized. He told himself that the imprisoned dissidents, the censored media, the secret police and surveillance systems were all necessary evils that would be phased out once the Empire was secure. The awakening came gradually, then all at once.
It began when Revan led a campaign against a rebel cell on the planet Lothal.
Intelligence suggested this cell was planning terrorist attacks against Imperial facilities, justifying a military response. But when Revan's forces swept through the rebel base, he discovered that the terrorists were primarily civilians protesting the Empire's seizure of their farmland for a weapons manufacturing complex. Their leader was not a battle-hardened insurgent, but a school teacher who had watched her students conscripted into forced labor for the Empire. Revan watched his Imperium Guard troopers execute the rebels per standard protocol, and for the first time in years, he truly saw what he had become. These were not enemy combatants, but desperate people fighting for basic dignity. The Empire he served was not bringing order. It was enforcing oppression. Every justification he had constructed for the past 5 years crumbled in the face of a dying teacher's accusatory stare. That night, Revan reached out through the Force, seeking the clarity he had once found in meditation. What he encountered was darkness so deep it threatened to swallow him whole. The Emperor's presence in the Force was like a black hole, warping everything around it toward corruption and suffering. And Revan himself had become a satellite to that darkness, his own light dimmed almost to extinction by proximity to such concentrated evil. The realization of what he had done, of how thoroughly he had been manipulated and had manipulated himself, nearly destroyed Revan. For 3 days he remained in seclusion, torn between suicide and the desperate hope that redemption might still be possible. His mind, which had once seemed so clear in its philosophical convictions, now recognized the rationalization and self-deception that had led him down this dark path. He had believed himself to be transcending the limitations of both Jedi and Sith, when in reality, he had simply found more sophisticated ways to justify evil. On the 4th day, Revan emerged from his meditation with a new purpose. He could not undo the past 5 years, could not bring back the beings whose deaths he had caused or sanctioned. But he could prevent the Empire from spreading its darkness further. He could fight back, using the very power he had gained through service to evil to now oppose it. His first act of rebellion was quiet. He began sabotaging Imperial operations from within, using his authority to divert resources to planets that needed them rather than to military projects. He warned rebel cells of impending Imperial raids, allowing them to escape before his forces arrived. He recruited members of the Imperium Guard who shared his growing doubts about the Empire, slowly building a network of double agents within the very organization he had created. Emperor Palpatine, focused on crushing the growing rebel alliance and consolidating his power, did not immediately notice these subtle acts of defiance. By the time he sensed something wrong in his apprentice's loyalty, Revan had already laid the groundwork for open rebellion. The break came during a mission to Alderaan, where Revan had been ordered to arrest several senators suspected of supporting the rebellion. When he arrived at the specified address, he found not a rebel safe house, but a children's hospital recently expanded with funds from the very senators he was supposed to arrest. The Empire's intelligence had been fabricated, a pretext to eliminate political opponents whose only crime was opposing the Emperor's policies through legal channels. Revan made his choice. Instead of arresting the senators, he warned them of the Emperor's plans and helped them escape off-world. Then he sent a message to Palpatine, one that would echo through the Empire's halls of power and signal the beginning of a new kind of civil war. "I have seen the Empire's true face," the message read, "and I reject it. You promised order, but you have delivered only tyranny. You claim to bring peace, but you have sown fear. I was blind to serve you, but now I see. From this day forward, I am no longer your apprentice. I am your enemy." The Empire will fall, and I will be the one to bring it down. This I swear." Darth Revan had finally returned to the light, but unlike his previous transition, this time he understood the cost of the journey. Redemption would not come easily, would not be granted simply because he had changed sides. He would have to earn it through sacrifice, through fighting against everything he had helped build. The Empire had a new enemy, one who knew its secrets, commanded some of its most powerful forces, and possessed a determination born of profound regret. The galactic civil war was about to become infinitely more complicated. Revan's defection sent shockwaves through both the Empire and the nascent Rebel Alliance. For the Empire, losing one of their most powerful commanders and military strategists represented not just a tactical blow, but a propaganda disaster. The Emperor's propaganda machine had spent years portraying Darth Revan as the embodiment of imperial might and justice. Now that same figure had denounced the Empire as tyrannical, lending credibility to the rebellion's cause in ways that Mon Mothma's speeches never could. For the Rebel Alliance, however, Revan's apparent conversion to their cause created a dilemma. This was a man who had hunted down surviving Jedi, who had led brutal campaigns against rebellious worlds, who had been the Emperor's right hand in establishing the Empire's authoritarian rule. His victims numbered in the thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. Could such a person be trusted? Should such a person be welcomed into a movement fighting for freedom and justice? Mon Mothma, the Alliance's civilian leader, advocated for cautious cooperation. "We cannot afford to reject powerful allies simply because their past is complicated," she argued during a leadership council meeting. "If Darth Revan truly seeks to atone for his actions, we should give him the opportunity to do so. His knowledge of Imperial operations alone makes him invaluable." But others, particularly those who had lost family to Revan's campaigns, demanded justice rather than alliance. Senator Bail Organa, though generally moderate in his approach to such questions, pointed out that accepting Revan without accountability would demoralize those who had suffered under his command.
"We're fighting for a better galaxy," Organa reminded the Council.
"If we compromise our principles for the sake of military expediency, we become no better than the Empire we oppose." The debate became moot when Revan made it clear he had no intention of formally joining the Rebel Alliance. Instead, he established himself as an independent force, a third faction in the galactic civil war. He took with him approximately 1/3 of the Imperium Guard, those who shared his disillusionment with the Empire or who were personally loyal to him rather than to Palpatine. He also commandeered several Imperial Star Destroyers using his authority codes before the Emperor could revoke them. In a single coordinated action, Revan created a fleet powerful enough to challenge both Imperial and Rebel forces. His stated goal was simple: dismantle the Empire through targeted strikes against its infrastructure while avoiding civilian casualties as much as possible. Unlike the Rebel Alliance, which focused on inspiring hope and winning hearts and minds, Revan's approach was surgical and ruthless. He identified the Empire's supply chains, its key manufacturing facilities, its command and control nodes, and he systematically destroyed them. His first major operation targeted the Imperial weapons manufacturing complex on Lothal, the same facility whose construction had dispossessed the farmers whose executions had awakened his conscience. Revan's fleet emerged from hyperspace and broadcast a single warning. All Imperial personnel had 2 hours to evacuate before the facility would be destroyed. To prove he was serious, he used his Star Destroyer's turbolasers to obliterate a series of empty warehouses, demonstrating both his power and his precision. The Imperial garrison commander, recognizing that evacuation was the only option that didn't result in massive casualties, complied. As promised, once all personnel were off-site, Revan reduced the weapons complex to rubble. No lives were lost, but the Empire's weapons production in the entire sector was crippled. This became his pattern. Unlike the Rebel Alliance's hit-and-run tactics, Revan employed overwhelming force, with an emphasis on minimizing loss of life. He gave warnings before attacks. He targeted infrastructure rather than personnel. And crucially, he demonstrated through both words and actions that his quarrel was with the Empire's leadership and systems, not with the average being serving in its military. Many Imperial officers, demoralized by their own leadership's corruption and brutality, began to defect to Revan's forces rather than die defending an empire they had come to question. Emperor Palpatine, furious at this unprecedented challenge, assigned his other apprentice to deal with the problem. Darth Vader, the Dark Lord of the Sith who had once been Anakin Skywalker, was tasked with hunting down and eliminating the traitor who dared to rebel against the Emperor's authority. The duel of destinies. The confrontation between Darth Revan and Darth Vader was inevitable, a collision of two fundamentally different paths to darkness and attempts at redemption. They finally met over the planet Mustafar, appropriately enough given that this world had witnessed Anakin Skywalker's transformation into Vader decades earlier. Revan's fleet had come to Mustafar to destroy an Imperial fortress where Vader had been conducting experiments with dark side artifacts, trying to unlock secrets that might restore his physical body or increase his power. Neither side was interested in avoiding the confrontation. Both recognized that this battle would help determine the Civil War's ultimate direction. They met on neutral ground, a lava-scarred platform overlooking the planet's hellish landscape. Vader arrived first, his imposing figure silhouetted against streams of molten rock flowing in the distance. When Revan landed his shuttle and descended to the platform, he was struck by how much presence Vader commanded despite his mechanical nature. This was not simply a man in a suit. This was the dark side made manifest, rage and hatred given physical form. So Vader's mechanically enhanced voice resonated across the platform. The Emperor's favorite has finally revealed his true cowardice. You flee from the power we fought to build because you lack the strength to wield it properly. I fled from nothing, Revan replied, his hand resting on his lightsaber hilt. I opened my eyes to what we had become. The question is, when will you open yours? You presume to lecture me about truth? Vader took a step forward, and the very air seemed to darken around him. You, who convinced yourself that serving the Emperor was noble, that crushing the Jedi would bring peace, you believed your own lies until reality became impossible to ignore.
At least I am honest about what I am.
The observation struck home, but Revan had spent months in meditation coming to terms with his own capacity for self-deception. You're right. I lied to myself about the Empire, but you're lying to yourself about something far worse. You tell yourself that Anakin Skywalker is dead, that only Vader remains. But I can sense him in you, buried beneath the rage and suffering. He's still there, Vader, still hoping for redemption even if you won't acknowledge it.
The platform trembled as Vader's fury manifested through the Force.
Anakin Skywalker was weak. He failed to save those he loved. Vader is strong and will never make his mistakes. Vader is a slave, Revan countered. A slave to the Emperor, to your own pain, to the dark side itself. At least Anakin was free, even if that freedom led to terrible choices. You've traded one form of slavery for another and convinced yourself this is power. The philosophical debate ended and the combat began. Both ignited their lightsabers simultaneously, Vader's crimson blade and Revan's violet blade casting eerie light across the darkening platform. They circled each other briefly, each assessing the other's stance and readiness. Then Vader struck, his opening move a devastating overhead slash that would have cleaved a lesser opponent in two. Revan parried and countered, his own attacks coming in rapid succession, testing Vader's defenses. The two Sith Lords fought with techniques drawn from centuries of accumulated knowledge. Vader employed the brutal efficiency of Form V, every movement calculated to maximize damage while conserving energy. Revan flowed between multiple forms, adapting his style to counter each of Vader's attacks, using his agility to compensate for Vader's superior strength. As they fought, they continued their verbal exchange, words serving as weapons alongside their lightsabers. Vader accused Revan of hypocrisy, pointing out that he still used dark side powers while claiming to fight for justice. Revan acknowledged this but argued that power itself was neutral, only its application mattered. They debated while lava flowed beneath them, while their force powers tore chunks of rock from the ground and sent them hurtling through the air. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. Both combatants were among the most powerful Force users alive, and neither could gain a decisive advantage. Finally, Vader unleashed a Force choke, lifting Revan off the ground and beginning to crush his windpipe. But Revan, instead of struggling against the grip, redirected his focus inward, drawing on reserves of light and dark power simultaneously. What happened next was something few Force users had ever achieved. Revan created a Force storm, a combination of dark side lightning and light side energy that manifested as a swirling vortex of raw power. The storm broke Vader's concentration, freeing Revan from the Force choke, and sent both combatants sliding across the platform toward the edge and the lava flows beyond. They both caught themselves at the last moment, each using the Force to anchor to the platform's remaining stable sections. For a long moment, they simply stood there, breathing heavily, acknowledging through their exhaustion that neither could defeat the other this day. "This isn't over," Vader declared, his breathing apparatus working overtime to supply oxygen to his damaged lungs. "No," Revan agreed. "But neither is it necessary. You don't have to serve the Emperor, Vader. You don't have to be this. There's still a choice, still a chance to become something more than an instrument of tyranny." "There is no choice," Vader responded, but there was something in his voice, some hint of uncertainty that suggested Revan's words had found their mark. "The Emperor is the only thing that matters. Serve him or be destroyed by him. That is the way of the Sith." "Then the Sith are fools," Revan said quietly. "And I was a fool for believing I could be one without losing myself." "Don't make the same mistake I did, Vader. Don't wait until you've destroyed everything you could have protected before you finally see the truth." With that, Revan retreated to his shuttle, leaving Vader standing alone on the platform. The Dark Lord watched the ship ascend into Mustafar's ash-choked sky, troubled by thoughts he had not allowed himself in years. The seed of doubt had been planted, though it would be years before it bore fruit. The Galactic Civil War entered a new phase, with Revan's fleet operating as an independent third force. The Rebel Alliance, initially wary of cooperation, gradually established informal coordination with Revan's operations. When Alliance intelligence identified Imperial targets, they would sometimes pass that information to Revan's forces, knowing that he had the firepower to strike at objectives beyond the rebellion's capabilities. In return, Revan's systematic destruction of Imperial infrastructure made it easier for the rebellion to operate, creating power vacuums that Alliance-aligned systems could fill. But the Alliance was always tenuous, always contingent on shared enemies rather than shared values. There were incidents where Revan's methods clashed with Alliance principles. On Corellia, when an Imperial garrison refused to evacuate before his deadline, Revan destroyed the facility anyway, killing hundreds of soldiers who were simply following orders from their superiors. The Alliance condemned the action publicly, even as they privately acknowledged that the garrison's destruction had prevented it from being used to launch attacks on Alliance supply lines. Revan himself struggled with the moral complexities of his position. He had rejected the Empire but couldn't fully embrace the rebellion because their methods seemed inadequate to the scale of the threat. He had drawn on both light and dark aspects of the Force, but doing so required constant vigilance to prevent the darkness from overwhelming him again. He was, in essence, attempting to forge a third path between Jedi and Sith, between rebellion and Empire, and the strain of maintaining that balance took its toll. His solution was to surround himself with advisors who represented different perspectives. He recruited former Jedi who had survived Order 66, asking them to challenge him when his methods became too dark. He kept former Imperial officers on his staff, valuing their strategic expertise while insisting they operate within ethical constraints he defined. And crucially, he established councils drawn from the populations of worlds his forces had liberated, ensuring that civilian voices had input into his military decisions. This diverse command structure created its own friction. Former Jedi were horrified when Revan employed dark side techniques in combat. Imperial officers chafed under restrictions that prevented them from using the most efficient but brutal tactics. Civilians demanded that resources be diverted from military operations to humanitarian aid. But Revan believed these tensions were healthy, that they prevented any single perspective from dominating and leading to the kind of absolutism that had doomed both the Jedi Order and the Empire. For nearly 2 decades, this uneasy arrangement persisted. Revan's forces conducted hundreds of operations against Imperial targets, slowly but systematically weakening the Empire's hold on the galaxy. The Rebel Alliance fought their own campaigns, gradually winning systems to their cause. The Empire, under Palpatine and Vader's leadership, struggled to fight on 2 fronts while maintaining control over their vast territory. Then came the Battle of Yavin, and everything changed. When news reached Revan that the Death Star had been destroyed by a young rebel pilot named Luke Skywalker, he immediately understood the significance. This Luke was Vader's son, the child of Anakin Skywalker.
The Force practically sang with the resonance of this connection, and Revan realized that the endgame was approaching.
The prophecy of the Chosen One, which the Jedi had believed referred to Anakin, might actually point to his son, or perhaps to the family itself, to the complicated interplay of light and dark that the Skywalker bloodline embodied. Revan made a decision that shocked his advisors. He withdrew his forces from active combat operations and went into seclusion. His stated reason was that the rebellion now had a symbol that could rally the galaxy far more effectively than his own complicated legacy. But his real motivation was different. He sensed through the Force that the confrontation between Luke, Vader, and the Emperor would determine the galaxy's fate. His role was not to fight in that final battle, but to ensure that whatever emerged from it had the foundation to build something better. So while the rebellion fought desperately to destroy the second Death Star, while Luke Skywalker faced his father and the Emperor aboard that massive battle station, Revan quietly worked to build the infrastructure for a new order. He established hidden academies where Force-sensitive refugees could train in techniques drawn from both light and dark traditions, but emphasizing balance rather than extremism. He created networks of support for systems that would be devastated when the Empire finally fell, ensuring the collapse wouldn't lead to chaos. He prepared, in essence, for the galaxy that would exist after the Skywalker family's destiny had played out. When word came that the Emperor was dead, Killed by Vader's final act of redemption, Revan felt a profound sense of closure.
The dark side's hold on the galaxy had been broken, not through military force, but through the power of love and sacrifice.
Anakin Skywalker had finally fulfilled his destiny, bringing balance to the Force by destroying the Sith at the cost of his own life. The New Dawn, the years following the Empire's defeat, were chaotic and difficult. The New Republic emerged from the rebellion, attempting to recreate the democratic institutions that had been destroyed decades earlier. Revan's forces, no longer needed as a military counterbalance to the Empire, transitioned into a different role. They became peacekeepers, mediators, and most importantly, educators. The academies Revan had established expanded, becoming sanctuaries where Force sensitives could learn about the full spectrum of the Force without being forced to choose between Jedi and Sith dogma. Revan himself, now elderly but still formidable, served as a teacher and advisor. He shared his experiences freely, speaking candidly about his fall to darkness and his long struggle for redemption, using his own mistakes as lessons for the next generation. Luke Skywalker, working to rebuild the Jedi Order, initially viewed these academies with suspicion. The idea of teaching students about dark side techniques seemed fundamentally dangerous, a recipe for creating new Sith. But when he finally met with Revan, the two Force users recognized in each other a shared understanding of the Force's complexity. "Your father," Revan told Luke during one of their conversations, "understood something that few Jedi ever grasp. The dark side isn't simply evil to be resisted. It's an aspect of reality that exists whether we acknowledge it or not. By pretending it doesn't exist, the Jedi leave themselves vulnerable to its temptation. By teaching students to understand darkness without being consumed by it, we can create Force users who are truly balanced." Luke listened, but maintained his reservations. The old Jedi Order failed because they became rigid and blind to their own flaws. But I'm not convinced the solution is to teach people to use dark side powers. Isn't that how the Sith began? Jedi who thought they could control darkness?
The Sith began when Jedi who had experienced darkness were cast out instead of helped, Revan corrected gently. They were exiled to unknown space, where their bitterness and resentment allowed darkness to consume them completely.
What if instead the Jedi had acknowledged that emotion and passion aren't inherently wrong? What if they had taught their students to channel these feelings constructively rather than suppress them until they exploded?
The philosophical debate continued for hours, both men respecting the other's perspective even when they disagreed.
Eventually, they reached a compromise. Luke's Jedi Academy would teach the traditional path, while Revan's schools would offer an alternative approach. Students would be free to choose between them or even to learn from both, creating a diverse Force-using community, rather than a monolithic order that could be corrupted or destroyed wholesale. For nearly 3 decades, this arrangement worked well. A generation of Force users emerged who understood both light and dark, who could recognize manipulation and seduction while remaining grounded in principles of compassion and service. When threats arose, whether from Imperial remnants or new dangers, these Force users responded with both power and wisdom. But as Revan approached his 100th year, he began to sense a new disturbance in the Force, one that felt terrifyingly familiar. The dark side was gathering strength again, coalescing around a nexus of power that reminded him of his encounters with Emperor Palpatine. When Luke's academy was destroyed and his nephew Ben Solo had fallen to the dark side, becoming Kylo Ren, Revan understood that his work was not finished. The final lesson, the rise of the First Order and the emergence of Supreme Leader Snoke, represented everything Revan had fought against. This was not just another political faction or military threat. This was the dark side attempting to reassert its dominance over the galaxy. Snoke's corruption of Ben Solo particularly troubled Revan because it echoed his own seduction by Palpatine, a promising Force user convinced that the existing order was inadequate, that only through strength and decisive action could true peace be achieved. Revan, despite his advanced age, understood that he had to act. He couldn't allow another generation to suffer as he had, to make the same mistakes he had made. Using contacts he had maintained over decades, he arranged a meeting with Kylo Ren, hoping to do for Solo's grandson what no one had done for him, offer understanding and a path back to the light before it was too late. They met on the planet Takodana, in the ruins of an ancient Force temple that predated both Jedi and Sith. Kylo Ren arrived expecting a confrontation, his lightsaber ready, his mind full of Supreme Leader Snoke's warnings about Revan as a relic of a failed age. What he found instead was an old man sitting peacefully among the ruins, radiating a Force presence unlike anything Kylo had encountered before. "You're Darth Revan," Kylo stated, somewhat anticlimactically, given the dramatic potential of the moment.
I was, Revan acknowledged.
"Just as you are Kylo Ren but were once Ben Solo. Names change. Identities shift. The question is whether the person beneath them grows wiser or simply accumulates more regrets. You dare lecture me?" Kylo's anger flared, manifesting as a distortion in the Force around him. "You? Who betrayed the Emperor? Who spent decades hiding while the galaxy fell into chaos?" "I dare," Revan said simply, "because I've walked the exact path you're on now. I convinced myself that the Jedi were weak, that their adherence to outdated principles prevented them from achieving real good. I served a Sith Lord who promised me the power to create lasting peace. And I discovered far too late that every justification I had created was simply a sophisticated form of self-deception." "Luke Skywalker's Jedi were weak," Kylo insisted. "They couldn't prevent the First Order's rise. They couldn't protect the galaxy from its own corruption. Snoke understands that only strength can create the order necessary for peace. Snoke understands nothing except how to manipulate the ambitious and the hurt," Revan replied, his voice carrying a weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I can sense your pain, Ben Solo. The pain of being compared to your grandfather, of feeling like you can never live up to the legend of Anakin Skywalker or Luke Skywalker. That pain makes you vulnerable to anyone who offers you power and validation." The accuracy of the observation shook Kylo, breaking through his defensive anger. "You don't know anything about me." "I know everything about you," Revan countered, "because I was you. Talented, intelligent, frustrated by the limitations others imposed, convinced that I could do better if only I had the freedom to act. And I was right about one thing: I could do better than the Jedi Council. But better, in terms of military efficiency, doesn't mean better in terms of actual good. I won battles while losing my soul. Don't make the same mistake." They talked for hours, Revan sharing stories from his own fall and redemption, Kylo gradually opening up about his own struggles and doubts. The old man didn't try to convert Kylo back to the light through force or manipulation. Instead, he simply bore witness to the younger man's pain, acknowledged the validity of his frustrations while questioning his chosen solutions. As their meeting ended and Kylo prepared to return to the First Order, Revan offered one final insight. The dark side promises power, and it delivers, but power isn't the same as purpose. You can conquer the galaxy and still feel empty, still search for meaning that Force can never provide. The light side offers something more valuable: connection, community, the sense that you're part of something greater than yourself. Think about what you really want, Ben, not what Snoke tells you to want, but what you, in the deepest part of your being, actually need. Whether that conversation would have ultimately redeemed Kylo Ren is impossible to know, because shortly afterward Supreme Leader Snoke was killed and the First Order's remaining forces were defeated by the combined efforts of the Resistance and a redeemed Ben Solo. But those who witnessed Kylo's actions during those final battles noted that he fought with a restraint and strategic precision that seemed out of character, as if someone had taught him that power was most effective when tempered with wisdom. Darth Revan died peacefully at the age of 107, surrounded by students and colleagues who had become his family. His last words, spoken to a young Force sensitive who asked about the secret to balance, were characteristically concise. There is no balance without struggle. Light and dark will always exist. The key is to acknowledge both while serving neither absolutely. In the decades following his death, historians and Force scholars debated Revan's legacy endlessly. Some saw him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of moral relativism, noting how his philosophy of using both light and dark had led him into serving one of the galaxy's greatest evils. Others viewed him as a pioneer who had recognized the Jedi Order's fundamental flaws and worked to create something better from both its ashes and the Empire's ruins. The truth, as is often the case, was more complex than either extreme position suggested. Revan had made terrible mistakes, had caused immeasurable suffering through his service to Emperor Palpatine. No amount of subsequent redemption could erase those crimes or bring back those who had died because of his actions. But he had also spent the majority of his life fighting against the very evil he had once served, working tirelessly to ensure that future generations would not face the same false choices between rigid dogma and authoritarian power. His schools continued to operate long after his death, teaching Force sensitives to understand the full spectrum of the Force while maintaining ethical principles grounded in compassion and service. When Rey rebuilt the Jedi Order after the final defeat of Palpatine's resurrection, she incorporated many of Revan's insights, creating a more flexible tradition that acknowledged emotion and passion while still maintaining its commitment to the light. The galaxy would always remember Darth Revan as a complicated figure, villain and hero, Jedi and Sith, destroyer and builder. But perhaps that complexity was his greatest gift to future generations. In a galaxy that too often reduced the Force to binary oppositions, he demonstrated that there were shades and nuances, that individuals could walk paths that defied simple categorization, that redemption was always possible no matter how far one had fallen. His final journal entry, discovered after his death and now preserved in the archives of both the Jedi Temple and his own former academies, perhaps best captured the wisdom he had earned through a lifetime of struggle. I have been a Jedi. I have been a Sith. I have walked in light and darkness, served both tyranny and freedom. Through it all, I have learned that the Force is not a battlefield where light and dark wage eternal war, but a reflection of life itself in all its complexity. To truly serve the Force, we must first serve each other, must recognize that every being contains both light and shadow, and that our task is not to eliminate one or the other, but to help each other grow toward wisdom, compassion, and understanding. May those who come after me build better than I did, learn faster than I learned, and create a galaxy where no one needs to choose between false extremes. This is my hope. This is my prayer. This is the meaning I have found in a life marked by both terrible mistakes and hard-won redemption. The story of what happened when Darth Revan was born during the Skywalker Saga is ultimately a story about the power of choice, about how even the darkest fall can be followed by redemption, about how wisdom often comes through suffering and mistakes, and about how the galaxy's future is never predetermined, but always shaped by the decisions of individuals willing to fight for what they believe is right, even when the path forward is neither clear nor simple. In an alternate timeline where this legendary figure walked among the heroes and villains of the Skywalker era, the galaxy would have been forever changed, not because he was more powerful than anyone else, though he was certainly formidable, but because he embodied the possibility of transformation, the hope that no one is beyond redemption, and the wisdom that comes from acknowledging all aspects of the Force while being enslaved by none. If you enjoyed this deep dive into an alternate Star Wars timeline, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Let me know in the comments what other what-if scenarios you'd like me to explore. May the Force be with you always in all its complexity and infinite possibilities.